About 3 years ago, I started covering immigration in the United States. One of the stories I started working on was the ordeal of a Mexican immigrant who had been recently placed in deportation proceedings in El Paso, Texas. His name was Emilio. I started by looking into everything I could find about Emilio's life. It turns out he was a local reporter from a newspaper in the border state of Chihuahua. He worked there until 2008, when a group of Mexican men from the army stormed into his house at the middle of the night and threatened to kill him and his son. They spared his life that night, but Emilio feared for his safety. So he went to the National Rights Commission in Mexico and presented a claim. However, threats kept coming his way. Without many more options, he decided to seek asylum in the US, and it was granted. He lived there without any inconvenience until 2017, the first year of the Trump administration. At that time, he went in for one of his routine check-in appointments with ICE and was immediately detained. Immigration authorities placed him in a detention center awaiting deportation. That's when our paths crossed. Speaking to Emilio was complicated. In order to communicate with him, we had to ask his attorney to tell him to call us from the detention center. And that was costly for him. So I started looking for alternative ways to find information about him. That is how I started to look for all the documents I could find in order to reconstruct his life through the paper trail. I found his claim with the Human Rights Commission in Mexico, the original request for asylum in the US, and his most recent court case docket with immigration authorities. But there was one thing I could never find: his work. Luckily, Emilio was and still is alive. I could have asked him for a copy of his articles, but that wasn't the focus of her story at the moment. It did get me thinking, though. If Emilio was well and alive, and his work was so hard to find, what happened to the work of journalists who were actually killed in my country? What happens to the legacy of a slain reporter? And why is it that the only thing we know about a journalist who has been killed is the fact that they were murdered? Shouldn't they be remembered for more? Here, I'd like to ask everyone watching a series of questions. The first one is, how many of you knew that Mexico is currently the deadliest country to be a reporter in the world, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists? If you knew that, I would like to ask you now if you know the name of any of these killed reporters. Maybe you know the name of one, two, maybe even half a dozen names. Since the year 2000, the number of reporters killed in my country is 119, according to the most conservative statistics. Now, even if you knew the name, has any of you read, heard, or viewed the work of any of these reporters? If you haven't, the sad truth is you're not alone. With the exception of a few people that personally knew the reporters, most of us do not know what they created. Leslie Ann Pamela Montenegro del Real was a young YouTuber and blogger from the coastal city of Acapulco. She took her makeup tutorials to a next level when she created El Sillón magazine, an online outlet with a specific section for broadcast news. I believe Leslie Ann was also looking for ways to make people laugh. The journalist used a persona for her videos. She dressed up in an unassuming cleaning robe and a big wig, Nana Pelucas. She covered anything from the price of produce in local markets all the way to interviewing public officials and local politicians. Leslie Ann's journalism changed the life of people in Acapulco in quotidian ways. Ruben Patkawich was a reporter from a different coastal city, Playa del Carmen. Ruben had a significant career covering crime and the police. When the newspapers he worked for stopped publishing in his city, he became the director of a new enterprise, a Facebook-based news outlet called Semanario Playa News. In the videos, Ruben was seen either directing a morning show or patrolling the streets of his city. On Facebook Live, he chronicled fires, car crashes, and crime scenes. I believe he sought to document the rise of violent events in his community. I think Ruben's reporting might have protected people from harm. Few people know this about them, though. Few people know that Leslie Ann did satirical videos and that she was particularly critical of the mayor of her city as Acapulco rose to the murder capital of the world. Or that Ruben Patcawich and Francisco Romero Diaz, his reporting partner, also killed, broadcasted some of the most shocking shootings orchestrated by organized crime in the tourist city of Playa del Carmen. Few people in Mexico know that Ricardo Monluí Cabrera covered the sugarcane industry and its political downfalls from the corrupt state of Veracruz, a state where the former governor is in prison for embezzlement. Or that Nevid Condés Jaramillo showed his local culture and denounced abuse of power from the southern part of the state of Mexico, Tierra Caliente, where inequality is rampant. The fact that most people don't know this about them is almost unfathomable, because their work was precisely created to be seen, to be read, to be heard. They documented daily life in their communities, thus creating expansive waves of information that was used in turn by citizens as a tool to make decisions and participate in public life. These works that we know so little about are what created ripples. Reporters are seekers at heart. We're either looking for proof to sustain our investigations, a way to unearth a hidden wrongdoing, or moving testimony for a documentary. Doesn't really matter what specific form of it we're looking for. Journalists search for truth. It is through the exposure of this truth that we intend to exert change. The role of the press is to inform citizens, to help them make better decisions, hold representatives accountable in the polls, and organize among themselves via other means of political participation. That is why journalism is known as the fourth estate. Democracies wouldn't even exist without journalism. As Nobel Prize winner, economist Amartya Sen wrote, "The free press can even help prevent and fight famine." But in Mexico, the ripples created by reporters' work are often lost. Mexico is a country where over 77,000 people are currently missing due to enforced disappearance or kidnapping. It might be hard to wrap your head around a number like this. Imagine a full Yankee Stadium and a half. And now think of all of those people simply vanishing into thin air. No trace, no graves, no tombstones, no bodies even. Hell, no proof of death. In recent years, on top of the disappearances, 130,000 people's lives have been taken. 99% of these murders remain unsolved. Something terrible happens to victims of violence beyond the fact that they were attacked. Their deaths are so abrupt and unjust that they often dominate the person's legacy. That one thing that someone else did to them defines how they are remembered in history. If you Google Leslie Ann Pamela Montenegro del Real, you will only find things such as murdered journalist or killed YouTuber. Because on February 5th of 2016, Leslie Ann was having dinner with her husband in the coastal city of Acapulco when two assailants walked into the restaurant and shot her twice. She was specifically targeted and subsequently killed. In a statement delivered shortly after by a local prosecutor, he said that she had made herself the target of violence because of her publications. Apart from one single detainee, the crime remains unsolved. Ruben was murdered on July 24th, 2018. He was shot at least 6 times at 5:30 p.m. while in a local bar at Playa del Carmen. Ruben was the second reporter killed from his outlet, and he wouldn't be the last. His murder also remains unsolved. In Mexico, when a journalist is killed, their memory is immediately replaced by the crime that took their lives. They are suddenly remembered by what someone else did to them, not by the work they spent years doing. When they are killed, not only their life is taken, their agency and their right to choose what they are remembered for is taken from them too. And just like that, the last few minutes of their lives overshadow decades of existence. And when that happens, their work suddenly enters an expedited track into oblivion. When a journalist is killed, activists often say in Mexico, he or she is killed twice. The person is murdered and their work is silenced. That is doubly tragic. I say that tragedy has yet another angle. When the work they had already produced goes missing, the entire country loses a part of its history as well. That is why I created Democracy Fighters, Defensores de la Democracia, a living archive that preserves the works authored by journalists killed in Mexico. Before this archive, no such collection existed. And along with journalists' legacies, we were losing a trove of information about our recent history. After all, as Philip Leslie Graham, president of the Washington Post, once said, journalism is the first draft of history. When I started working on this archive, I backed up all of the videos that I could find created by Leslie Ann. I also collected a series of links with Ruben Pat's live broadcasts saved on his Facebook page. At the moment, though, I wasn't able to create the backup for Ruben's work. So I came back to those links 5 months later, and I found something that I wasn't expecting. All of Ruben's work had disappeared. Later, a friend of him explained that the Facebook page had been the target of attacks where unknown users would flag all of Ruben's material as inappropriate content, thus activating Facebook engine to delete everything. A few months after her murder, Leslie Ann's website was also gone. Ricardo Monluí Cabrera's online newspaper suffered the same fate. The website is lost. Most journalists murdered in Mexico worked for small, local, and underfunded outlets. Institutional support and infrastructure for local journalism in Mexico is scarce. It's either poorly paid with no benefits, or it is subjected to the editorial approval of the local governments they are investigating. That's why oftentimes journalists decide to create their own outlets to publish. And when they die, the domains go up for sale. Their content can be taken down from social media, and their print pieces remain scattered away and uncatalogued in basements. Slain journalists' work tell the story of thousands of towns. These works might also hold hidden clues to unsolved crimes, including the reporter's own murders. Above all, these works certainly represent journalists' legacies and the legacy of Mexico. Years from now, I dread, we'll find ourselves wondering what happened to us as a people. And maybe those works, which are currently scattered and quickly disappearing, already hold the answers that can help put this country back together. As their legacy is silenced along with them, the ripple effect of their work is also lost. The information they provided for us to act on is gone. And we find ourselves back at the beginning, like I did when I met Emilio, looking unsuccessfully for his work on the military in the border. When I started thinking about this talk, I wondered, What are we really searching for when we call together this archive? Is it truth? Is it memory? Is it justice? Is it dignity? Can't it be all of them? There are so many people remembered by what they left behind. Take architects, for example. They are remembered in the buildings they created. Attorneys' work lives on in the court cases they argued. Physicians' legacies live on through the people they helped heal. Professors' legacies live on in the minds they nurtured. Journalists' legacies should not be the crimes that took their lives. To revert this tragedy, in the past 2.5 years, my team and I have been able to rescue over 15,000 clips authored by more than 43 journalists killed in Mexico. The archive is only in Spanish for the time being, but if you want to read, listen, or view some of these reporters' work, you can definitely do so now in Democracy Fighters and via our podcast, Voces Silenciadas. The platform is a tool that you can use to study the reporting, conduct research, and write your own stories. It is my hope that through this archive, their work survives them, and that the ripple effect of the reporting resonates on even after they're gone. Defensores de la Democracia, thus, is an act of rebellion in itself. Through this archive, we fight against oblivion. We refuse to allow the murderers to rewrite history and smother the ripple effects of their victims' journalistic work. This fight to preserve reporters' memory and dignity, I hope, will create some ripples of its own. Thank you.